Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to the Sagas of Swamp Thing podcast. Today, we are reading issue number 19, and just a little catch-up on what happened in the last issue. Last time, Matt Cable, Abby Arcane, and Swamp Thing came upon a village of old people, and it turned out that this was some kind of geriatric treatment center because some doctor had come up with a new treatment for old people where they will spend their remaining years in a village that is full of, like, little toys for kids and stuff. Because basically when you're old, your life goes full circle. When you're a baby, you can't take care of yourself. You need people. And they figure, oh, when you're old, the same thing. So we'll try to make those things a little bit more circular. So we'll actually treat them like little children or babies. And that will help them, I guess. And as you can imagine, of course, the older people did not like that. And one of them turned to black magic, of course. Because what else are you going to do? And the head guy who did that was named Aubrey Trask. And using these occultic magics, he was able to transfer ages with the guy that was running this facility. So he was young, and then that guy that was running the facility became old, and I believe eventually died. And of course, now that Matt and Abby are here, they are perfect specimens for two more older people to become young. And that is what happens. They get kidnapped. The head guy tries to do some voodoo. Of course, Swamp Thing, who had thought, he's just going to leave his friends at this little town, ends up finding out about this whole thing, and he tries to save his friends. And he's pretty successful at that, mainly because this village is full of old people that can't defend themselves, but they do try to attack Swamp Thing. So we got some awesome panels of Swamp Thing beating up old people, which is pretty crazy. But of course, in the end, Trask does not succeed, and Matt, Abby, and Bolt all live. I forgot to mention Bolt was part of this too, but he's been just kind of in the background with them. The same things that happened to them happen to him. So they all survive, and of course, at the end, Swamp Thing does his usual thing where he's like, no one likes me, and I don't want to be with anybody. So he walks off on his own and leaves Matt, Abby, and Bolt to continue looking for him or just go home. Which brings us to issue 19. We got the cover here. We see Swamp Thing lifting a tractor over his head, and he is about to throw it on a bunch of workers that are in the area. And he looks pretty mad at them, so he might actually do it. And as we turn to the first page, we get a nice serene picture of some swampland, and we see Swamp Thing walking through the water, except something's wrong with Swamp Thing, because his eyes are yellow, which is very different. Normally they are red. And he seems to be walking with a purpose, like he's got a scowl on his face, and he's hunched forward as he pushes through the water. So over these panels, the narration says, somewhere in the world there is sanity. Somewhere, reality is uncomplicated by madness. Somewhere, but not here. Not today. Not in the Florida Everglades on this hot summer afternoon. Here, a shambling mockery of a man stalks grimly through the emerald shadows, his body dripping muck and slime, his brain an empty joke. For this is not the Swamp Thing we know. And if you doubt that for an instant, dear reader, look long and deep into his eyes. What you see is more monster than man, and in a way, more dead than alive. And as we get a very menacing panel of Swamp Thing looking out at us, we see the name of this issue is A Second Time to Die, and it is written by Jerry Conway with art by Nestor Redondo. And as we turn the page, we keep focusing on this Swamp Thing, and the narration continues saying, with slow, laden steps, this mindless creature staggers through the darkness apparently drawn by some inner force, guided by instinct toward a confrontation with what? With the past, perhaps? What is this creature's past? Where did it come from? Where, if the word can be used, was this monster born? Then we get a flashback to where this monster was born, and we see that it is from Swamp Thing number 5. If you remember, there was a young woman and her brother who were getting chased by a bunch of townsfolk that thought they were witches, and the kids ended up running into Swamp Thing, and he tried to help them, and when he confronted the villagers trying to stop them from the attack, they cut off one of his arms, and it fell off of a cliff into some water. So over the panels of this confrontation, we get the narration saying, Divinity, Maine, 24 months ago, on a wind-swept precipice overlooking a stormy ocean, 3 strange companions faced the wrath of an angry town. They were Dr. Alec Holland, the chemically transformed monstrosity known as the Swamp Thing, Rebecca Ravenwind, called a witch by the people of divinity, and Timothy Ravenwind, Rebecca's brother. Without warning, one of the townspeople struck. A man named Jocko lunged forward and swung a deadly scythe, severing Swamp Thing's arm, and arousing the malformed man-monster's non-inconsiderable wrath. Jocko's cries of agony caught the interest of all concerned, and no one noticed the vine-ensnarled arm fall to the rock several hundred feet below the cliff edge, a fall that was soon emulated by the Swamp Thing himself when a ledge of loose earth suddenly gave way. Not long after, a mossy chunk of flotsam was cast violently upon the shore several hundred yards from the cliff base. So just like the narration said, we see Swamp Thing fall in soon after his arm did, and then we see him getting up out of the water onto some stones, and as he does, he thinks, "Feel like a used sponge. So weak. My arms can barely support me." And then he looks down and notices that he in fact does have two arms again, but one of them looks small, like it has just grown and it's kind of withered, because of course a couple minutes ago it got cut off. So as Swamp Thing sees his new arm, he thinks, "My arms! Dear Lord, my severed arm has begun to grow back. The biorestorative formula in my system, in the lab, it caused rapid regeneration of plant life. And plant life is exactly what I've become. I'm whole again in a matter of minutes." Then we cut away from that flashback of Swamp Thing, and we cut to further down the shore, where we see the arm that was cut off of him, and it too begins to grow, but it does the reverse of what happened to Swamp Thing. Instead of Swamp Thing growing an arm, this arm grows a Swamp Thing. And as this happens on the last three panels, we get some narration that says, "Alec Holland went to aid Rebecca Ravenwind and her brother, but the importance of what had occurred was lost on him. For at that moment, at the base of the stormy cliff, a similar regeneration was in process, a regeneration which took several days to reach completion, and had a rather bizarre result, the creation of a second mindless Swamp Thing, possessing only instinct and emotion, guided by some internal drive we can never understand. The unthinking monstrosity staggered off, compelled by an emotion beyond the experience of men, a need to be rejoined with his better half. For 2 long years, he'd obeyed that nameless drive, crossing and recrossing a continent, always one step behind Alec Holland, until now. At last, this pseudo-Swamp Thing knows Dr. Holland is near, and nothing can stop the duplicate now. So we see the duplicate Swamp Thing walking through the swamp like he's on a mission, and he happens to come across a Native American man who is practicing shooting his bow and arrow. And he's too concentrated on this task to realize that Swamp Thing is right behind him. So as he focuses on his target, the narration says, "Ota Makana is as yet unaware of the danger approaching behind him. He concentrates completely on the moment at hand, on the bird which is soon to be his dinner, and on the bow which he holds with firm, untrembling fingers, not at all the fingers of so old and gray a man." Then we see Hota get a feeling like something's behind him, and as he turns to see Swamp Thing, the narration says, "Then suddenly he whirls at the sound behind him, and for the first time in several decades, Ota Makana feels the brain-chilling grip of mortal fear. It drives him momentarily insane." And by momentarily insane, they mean that he whips around and does what anyone would do if a giant Swamp Thing was behind you, and he shoots an arrow at it, yelling, "Spirit of my father, a demon!" And the arrow hits the duplicate Swamp Thing right in the chest, but of course it doesn't really do anything, and he actually just swats aside the Native American man and continues walking, and the narration says, "The swamp creature hardly seems to notice the arrow embedded in his chest. But he does notice the frightened Indian, for the Indian is in the creature's way, and nothing can stop him now. Possibly not even." Then we see this duplicate Swamp Thing walk into an area of ground that does not look covered by anything, and we see that the Native American man yells out, "Quicksand! The monster's stepped in the bog! If he keeps walking..." And we see that the duplicate Swamp Thing does indeed keep walking straight into the quicksand, and he begins to sink until he can't move. And the narration says, "Transfixed, Ota watches the brute shamble knee-deep into the clinging bog, waist-deep. And as he watches, the madness passes from Ota Machina. He takes a long, penetrating look into the creature's eyes, sees the monster realize his predicament, and understands with sudden sick horror. Then Ota yells out, "It's a child! A mindless child!" And the reason he's saying that is because as the duplicate Swamp Thing goes deeper and deeper into the quicksand, eventually it realizes it can't move, and then it turns to look at Hota, and he's got those eyes like a dog that's scared or something, or a child, like he said. So once Hota realizes that, he decides he needs to help this duplicate Swamp Thing, so he grabs a fallen tree that's on the ground, and he kind of pushes it towards the duplicate Swamp Thing so it can grab it and pull itself out. So as Hota moves the tree into the quicksand, he says, "Ancestors, forgive me. If the creature dies, his death will be on my head. Because I misunderstood. Because I attacked him. Perhaps with this log." And with that, the Swamp Thing grabs onto it, and Hota is holding it as well so that the Swamp Thing doesn't just pull it into the quicksand. And with that, the Swamp Thing is able to make his way to the shore. And as it crawls onto the bank, Hota thinks, "Will he understand what I've done? He's so large. He could kill me without effort. But will the monster understand?" Then the duplicate Swamp Thing stands up, and Hota follows, and they both just kind of stare at each other, and the narration says, "No words are exchanged, and no gestures are made. Yet something in the creature's gaze, something in the monster's stance, tells Hota Machina all he needs to know." Then Hota reaches out and puts a hand on the Swamp Thing's shoulder, and he thinks, "That's right, child. That's right. You have a friend." And then the narration says, "And very slowly, almost painfully, the 7-foot Swamp Thing nods." And now that the action's cooled down, I should actually describe Hota for y'all. He's an older Native American man who has long white hair, and he's wearing a red bandana, and he has a yellow kind of sweaterish shirt on, but it has Native American symbols on it. And then the pants are just gray bell-bottoms. And also I should mention, the narration calls him an Indian. Obviously, that's how they used to refer to Native Americans, so when I read the narration text, just know they mean Native American. Then we cut to a panel inside of a town nearby, and we specifically see a place called Sloan's Diner, and we see a Jeep pulling up to it, and in that Jeep is Matt Cable, Abby, and Bolt. And we get some narration that says, "Interlude. The next day. For the past 8 hours, Matt Cable, Abby Arcane, and Bolt have been on the road. 8 gut-wrenching hours jouncing in a Jeep, which has finally brought them here." Then we hear Matt say from the driver's seat, "Gatorsburg, Florida, orange juice capital of the Western Hemisphere. End of the line, folks, for tonight anyways." Then as all 3 of them get out of the Jeep and walk towards the diner, Abby asks, "Gators? Isn't this where Alec was last seen, Matt?" And Matt answers, "Almost. According to the field report by the state police, the Swamp Thing was sighted 2 miles south of here." And as Bolt walks ahead of them, he says back to Cable, "You sure like things nice and precise, don't you, Cable? Me? I'm like the little lady. If the report says Gatorburg, I figure the report means Gatorburg. Come on, let's ask one of the friendly natives." So Bolt walks up to the counter, and Matt says cautiously under his breath, "Bolt?" But before he can say anything else, the man behind the counter says, "Something I can do for you people?" And then Bolt sits down at the counter and says, "Now that's what I call Southern hospitality. As a matter of fact, we're looking for a 7-foot monster. Seen any around?" And the man behind the counter replies, "Are you funning with me, fella? A 7-foot what?" And we see also behind the counter there is a young boy, and the boy chimes in saying, "I seen something, mister. A big tall thing, down by Benson's swamps. Sometimes I go down that way to catch toads and stuff, and yesterday..." But he's cut off by the man behind the counter who says, "Junior, you shut up. Can't you see when folks are having a laugh at you?" And Junior says back, "But Pa, I was only..." But then his dad backhands him and says, "I said shut up." And then he moves to hit the boy one more time, but Matt Cable reaches out and grabs the man's arm and says, "Hold it right there, friend. Touch that boy again, and I'll..." But he's cut off as the man shrugs out of his grip, and he says, "Aw, forget it. Stupid boy don't know when people are making fun of him. Let him make a fool of himself. I don't care. And then Matt turns to the boy and asks, are you all right, little boy? And Junior replies, sure. Pa don't mean nothing by that. He just gets angry sometimes. But what I was telling you is true. I did see a monster by Benson's Swamp, where the old Indian lives. I saw him yesterday when I was gathering toads, just like I said. And as Junior is talking, we do see 3 men enter the diner. All 3 of them are white guys, and the biggest one is the man in front, and he's got a scraggly beard and bushy hair, and he's kind of fat and slovenly as well. He's wearing an undershirt with jeans, and he has on a bunch of biker gear like a leather hat, jacket, and boots. And as this man overhears the end of the boys' conversation, he says, hey, what's that? Old Huta's got himself a monster. Now that's what I call a laugh. And then he looks up at the man behind the counter and says, that boy of yours is a real fruitcake, Sloan. If it ain't one crazy story, it's another. A regular fruitcake, that kid. And Sloan actually gets angered by this, and he says, watch what you're saying, Earl. I need your business, but I don't gotta take your insults. Not against my boy. And then Earl walks over to the counter, and real slowly, and he looks Sloan right in the face and says, yeah? And what are you gonna do to me, Sloan? What are you gonna do, Sloan, baby? I'll tell you what you're gonna do. Nothing. And you know why you're gonna do nothing, fat man? 'Cause you're chicken. And everybody knows it, including you. And then he pushes a finger into Sloan's chest. So I didn't say it before, but obviously the man behind the counter is the owner of Sloan's Diner. And his son Junior was actually working there. I should probably describe them because they are in the rest of this comic. The boy is maybe like 12 or 13. He's got on jeans and a white shirt, and he's got blonde hair that's kind of long with freckles on his face. And Sloan is a big fat white man who's pretty angry looking all the time. He's wearing a pink button-up shirt, and we can't see anything else he's wearing other than an apron. So as this conversation is happening between Earl and Sloan, Matt, Bolt, and Abby take this chance to leave the diner, and as they walk out, the narration says, witnessing a man's humiliation isn't a pleasant sensation. In fact, it's sickening. The 3 companions leave Bert and Sloan's shabby little diner. Outside, though sweltering hot, the air seems somehow cleaner. And as they walk out, Matt is saying, I suppose we should try to find the swamp thing the boy talked about. Though, right now, I don't feel like trying much of anything until my stomach stops turning around. Then we see Junior, Sloan's son, running out of the diner behind them, and he says, Mister, wait up. Listen, if you want, I'll show you how to get to Benson's Swamp. And Matt turns to the boy and says, you will, huh? What about your father? And the boy answers, Pa don't need to know, right? I mean, you don't have to tell him, do you? But before Cable makes up his mind, Bolt picks Junior up and he puts him in the Jeep and he says, no, son, I guess we don't. What do you say, Cable? And Cable replies, I say we go. It's our first real lead in a week. We can't pass up the chance. And then he turns to Abigail and says, you stay here. Reassure the boy's father and keep your ears open in case something turns up before we get back. And then Matt joins Bolt and Junior in the Jeep, and as they drive off, Abigail says, I will, Matt. Then she thinks to herself, I only pray you find Alec Holland before something happens to him, before it's too late. Then we cut to the real Swamp Thing, who we haven't seen this whole issue, and he is standing on the edge of a cliff, and he's looking out over the swampy landscape below, and the narration says, and what of the real Swamp Thing? Where has he been throughout these preceding scenes? What thoughts have filled his mind, while events have proceeded without his participation? To learn the answer, we must look to the rim of an excavation far from the town of Gatorsburg, not a very high cliff, but one that looms over a pit of plant-dissolving lime. To put it mildly indeed, Alec Holland's thoughts have been grim. Then we get a close-up of Swamp Thing's eyes as he overlooks this pit, and he looks like he's about to cry, and he's thinking, I suppose there's nothing left to do. There never really was. My life ended the day I became this monster. Everything that's happened since has all been just a nightmare. Once I believed I might find a way to reverse the transformation. Now that hope is dead, if it ever really existed. All I'd really like to know is why. Why did I have to change? Why couldn't I have died when Linda died? Then he looks up to the sky like he's pleading with something, and his thoughts continue. Why couldn't I have had peace instead of living on some sort of bad joke, endlessly repeated? But his thoughts are suddenly cut off as he begins to feel something strange, and he says, huh? Strange tingling sensation. And then his body, completely out of his control now, turns and begins to walk, and he's thinking, what on earth? It's as though something were tugging at me, like iron to a magnet. Uncanny. I've never felt anything like it before. Can't resist. Whatever or whoever it is, it's got me completely under control. Then we get a panel of a construction site where we see a bunch of men working, and the narration says, not far from the cliff where the Swamp Thing has been brooding, men and machinery occupy a large clearing, site of a government excavation. The exact purpose of this particular government excavation isn't clear to the engineers working on the project, but they doubt it's important. Government excavations rarely are. Then we cut to a big bulldozer where we see the driver is calling down to a man below, and he says, dig the holes and fill them in. Some job for a college graduate, eh, Mr. Houston? And Mr. Houston calls back, at least you're working, Smith. Don't complain. Think we'll have this dig finished by tomorrow? And Smith answers, sure, if we work overtime. But why bother? We'll only be assigned to fill the hole in again next month, so... And then Smith stops talking as he sees Swamp Thing emerge from the tree line, and he begins screaming, and Mr. Houston says, Smith? What? And Smith starts up the bulldozer and says, a monster! Some sort of freaking monster! I'm getting out of here pronto! And then Mr. Houston turns to see Swamp Thing very close to him, and he says, good Lord! And as Swamp Thing's body continues to move forward, he thinks, can't control myself, or I'd have never come near this place. And then Mr. Houston takes off running, and as Swamp Thing's body mindlessly walks forward, we see the bulldozer that Smith is driving and Swamp Thing are on a collision course. And over this panel, the narration says, roaring and snarling like some beast awakened from a peaceful slumber, the 13-ton bulldozer grinds to life, and whether by chance or by intention, rumbles across the muddy clearing directly toward a lumbering man-brute, who strains against the invisible force drawing him forward. So Swamp Thing notices the danger he's about to be in, and we see him really try to break free mentally of whatever's controlling his body. And the narration says over this panel, strains, and for just an instant, breaks free. So now that Swamp Thing is mentally broken free of whatever was controlling him, he's able to stop, and he assesses that the man Smith who's driving the dozer isn't trying to hit him, but the dozer is out of control. And as Swamp Thing sees this, he thinks, that dozer, moving too quickly. Driver must have panicked. Can't stop the dozer, so I'll have to stop the driver before he stops me. And with that, Swamp Thing jumps onto the dozer, and he grabs the driver and he pulls him out. And of course, it's just in time because as they get to the ground, the dozer hits the tree, and Swamp Thing thinks, stupid, forgot the gas tank. When it crashes, the dozer will explode. And that's exactly what happens. This must be the strongest tree in the world, because as the dozer hits it, it does in fact explode for no explicable reason other than what Swamp Thing said, it's got a gas tank. Then we turn the page and we see Smith is running towards Houston and the other men, and Swamp Thing is nowhere to be found, and the narration says, when the smoke fades and the dust settles to the earth once more, several shock-stunned men stagger to their feet, grateful they're alive. And as Smith runs up to the men, he says, Houston, that thing, it's gone. Do you suppose the explosion killed it? And Houston replies, not likely, Smith. Somehow, I have a feeling we're going to see that creature again. Then we cut away from the construction site back to Matt, Bolt, and Jr., who have arrived at Benson's swamp, and they are talking to the Native American man Hota, who helped the duplicate Swamp Thing earlier. And over this panel, the narration says, interlude. 2 miles from the center of Gatorsburg, on the very edge of Benson's swamp. Then we see Hota is saying to Matt Cable, I tell you again, Mr. Cable, I have seen nothing. My young friend is mistaken. I hunt these lands daily, and there has been no creature in this area. That I swear. And with that information, Matt and Bolt turn, and Bolt says, that settles that. Guess it was just another wild goose chase. We've had quite a few of them these past few days. And then Matt notices that Junior's not moving, and he turns to him and says, Are you coming back to town, Junior? And Junior answers, No, sir, Mr. Cable. I'll get back myself later. So Matt and Bolt get in the Jeep, and as they drive away, Matt calls back, Well, the way you act, you can take care of yourself, kid. But don't stay too long. Your father might get worried. And then they drive off, and Junior turns to Hota and says, You lied to them, Hota. And Hota doesn't say anything. He just puts a hand on Junior's back, motioning for Junior to walk with him. And once he's sure that Matt Cable's Jeep is gone, he says to Junior, They are gone. We can talk, little chief. Now you may share my secret. Then we see him walk to a wooden building, and he opens the door. But we don't get to see what's inside. We actually cut away back to Sloane's diner, which is now packed with a bunch of construction workers, and we see Mr. Halton talking to Sloane behind the bar, and everybody has a beer in their hands, so they're definitely drinking, and Mr. Halton is saying, Biggest damn thing you ever saw. Must have been 7 feet tall, Sloane, and over a ton if I know my weights. And Sloane looks at him disbelieving and says, Has everybody in this town gone crazy? And we also see at the bar that Abby is just sitting, and she's obviously paying attention to what the men are saying, and she's just drinking a Coke so that she can maintain her wits. And Sloane actually points to her and says, First this girl and her friends come in here with some wild story. Now you, Halston? Then we see the biker Earl and all his lackeys at a table, and Earl heard this story too, and he says to Sloane, Maybe they're telling the truth. Maybe old Tonto the Indian is playing witch doctor up at Benton Swamp. Ha! And Sloane replies, Yeah. That crazy old Indian always did give me a pain. Somebody should go out there and find out what he does all day. Somebody should sure do that, Earl. And something interesting happens to Abigail when Sloane says this. And I believe it's because over the last couple issues, we've seen Abby get some kind of sixth sense that's been happening, almost like she's developing psychic and telekinetic powers. And as Sloane said this last thing about how maybe Earl should do something about Hota, she immediately begins feeling these bad vibes, so much so that she has to leave the diner. And over these panels of her walking out, the narration says, The tone of Burton Sloane's voice is harsh with desperation. The desperation of a man so loaded with self-loathing. He'll fix on anything or anyone to hate. Abigail Arcane is a sensitive woman, emotionally as well as physically. Burton Sloane's hate repels her, and only the clear night air, filled with the distant bird cries of the forest, can revive her. So we see her walk out to the tree line and look up at the moon, and she was feeling so bad from the hate that Sloane was putting out that she doesn't even hear Bolt and Matt's Jeep pull up. And when she doesn't acknowledge them, Matt says, Abby? Anything wrong? And as she turns and talks to them, we get some narration that says, Quickly, Abigail relates the engineer's story, omitting her private feelings about Burton Sloane. And then we see all three of them walking back towards the diner, and Matt says to her, This is our day for new leads, Abby. The last one didn't pan out. Let's hope this one fares somewhat better. Then we cut away from them and back to Swamp Thing, who is walking through a wooded area, and the narration says, As Matt Cable hurries out of the moonlight into the electric glow of Sloane's diner, not far away, stumbles from shadow into light and into shadow again. And when the text says stumbles, it literally means Swamp Thing falls down. And as Swamp Thing slams into the ground, the narration continues saying, Stumbling wearily from his feet to his knees, falling forward with unconscious grace. Slightly stunned from the bulldozer's explosion, the Swamp Thing has walked this last hour in a daze. Now his body will no longer work. It will no longer answer to his commands, never mind the commands of another control, referring to when his body was out of his control and walking on its own. So we see as Swamp Thing passed out and fell to the ground, he actually fell out from the forest onto a grassy patch near a road. And as he sleeps, we cut back to Hota and Junior, and both of them are staring at the duplicate Swamp Thing that is standing in the doorway of the shack that Hota opened the door of when we last saw them. And the narration says, And what of the controller? What of he who summons the Swamp Thing mindlessly, instinctively? Then we see Junior say, This is your secret? The monster? And Hota replies, Little Chief, he is not a monster. Haven't I taught you these past months? A man must not be judged by his color or race. He must not be judged by his appearance. Such is the white man's curse, little chief. To hate because of a man's body, not because of his soul. You must never fall prey to that sickness. As you grow older, you will understand what I have understood. Hatred consumes those who hate, as well as the hated. Such hatred was what drove my people from this land in the 1840s. We were the Seminole, a great nation, and the white man crushed us because he lusted for our land. And to explain his greed, he found us strange. He stole our land and pushed us northwest, out of Florida, into the western states, where we languished and died. And then Junior says, You told me that before, Hota, but when you talk, it's like you was remembering it, not just telling a story. And Hota says, Really? How odd. Come, little chief, it's time we ate. Then we cut to the next morning, and we see Matt Cable and Bolt are talking to Mr. Halston at the construction site. And over this panel, the narration says, Morning comes, sleek and warm, a pink sky turning blue as the sun rises above the horizon, spreading light across the world, to a glade where heavy machinery snarls into operation. Then we cut to Swamp Thing, who is waking up from being passed out, and the narration continues saying, And to a glen where a certain Swamp Thing stirs, awakened by an external impulse. And once again, Swamp Thing's body starts moving on its own, and as he gets up, Swamp Thing thinks, There it goes again. This time, I won't fight the impulse. I'm going to learn who's meddling with my mind. Then I'll deal with him once and for all. Then we cut to Hota, Junior, and the duplicate Swamp Thing, and they are on a boat, and Hota is pushing them through the waters of the swamp. And over this, the narration says, Pieces of a puzzle. For quite some time we've arranged them and shuffled them about, all without apparent purpose or reason. The reason will become clear as Hota Machina leads his young friend and his new companion through the dawn-shattered shadows of Benson's swamp, to a final overwhelming revelation. Then we see Hota stop pushing their boat as they enter an area with a nice waterfall, and he points to it and says to the duplicate Swamp Thing and Junior, The Grotto of Eternal Youth. And we can assume that the reason he's brought Junior and the duplicate Swamp Thing here is because of what Junior said earlier about how when Hota tells his stories about what happened to his tribe, he tells it like he was there and not like he's just telling stories. So we can kind of assume that the name Grotto of Eternal Youth is not just because it looks pretty forever, it's because maybe it makes you live forever. But we will have to wait until next issue to find out. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains.and-comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com. And remember, until next time, stay swampy.